Well, welcome everyone to this webinar all around cloud cost management. And what a fantastic topic for Tuesday, a Tuesday. I love talking about managing cloud costs every day of the week, but there's no better day than Tuesday. Very excited to share with you guys today some strategies for success. Before we get going, though, a couple of introductions. So you have myself today, Sam Nichols. I'm Director of Public Cloud at Veeam Software. So I have the fun job of looking after pretty much anything and everything that Veeam does with the three main hyperscalers, AWS, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud. And I'm very excited to have joined by me John Meyer, my friend and colleague, FinOps expert and podcast host of Meyer Media. John, do you want to say a few welcome words this morning?
First of all, Sam, thank you for thinking of me when you asked me to join for this. I love doing a lot of these sessions with you. It's an awesome conversation, very natural, and it's a very passionate conversation that I love and enjoy talking about. So as Sam mentioned, John Meyer, host of the John Meyer podcast, also chief content creator for Meyer Media, you know, all that type of content that you need to get out there. But I have a huge passion around FinOps, and I think that's why Sam invited me here. Sam?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you say, huge passion for FinOps. I don't know if any of you guys have been on any of John's blogs or podcasts, but big focus on FinOps, right? That portmanteau between finance and operations, and that's so pertinent in the cloud. And we're going to get a little bit more into that. But you're also an ex-Amazonian, right, John?
That I am, an ex-Amazonian, but always passionate at heart. And that's actually where I got a lot of things started. With cloud cost management, and FinOps was just a natural style conversation that it drove me towards, doing FinOps and around cloud cost management.
Absolutely. So before we get started, I am going to highlight that this is an interactive session. Yes, John and I have got a few slides planned out for you guys, but we're really putting this on for you. This is for you to come with your most burning questions, any advice that you're seeking, best practices. Yes, we're going to share those, but anything around, actually, it doesn't even have to be around cloud cost management. Any of your cloud woes, please post them in the Q&A. You'll see that highlight up on your screen, and John and I will just dynamically get to those as we go through the session today. But before we do
Sam,
get started,
I'm going to jump in there real quick. I want to encourage, I want to step on that and say, listen, drop the questions in there. Sam and I want to make this interactive. If you have a question, a passion about it, I will pull it in there. I'll be like, Sam, hold on. Let's answer this question. So feel free to drop some. There's also some, high fives emojis. We got all kinds of things going on. Sam, back to you.
All right, cool, man. So let's get started with our first little piece of interactive component, which is a poll question. And this is around the perfect cloud backup solution would. So you can only select one of these. So take a read through them and choose the one that's the most important to you. Is it A, just super simple and easy? B, saves you money? C, not lock you out of new technology? We're constantly evolving our strategies. And D, thwart even the smartest cyber criminals. So we're going to leave this up for a little bit, give you guys the opportunity to come in and answer some of these. And then we'll take a look at the poll results, and that will help steer our conversation as we go forward.
Sam, let me ask you the question. Which would be your option on this list?
It would be E, all of the above.
But if I like that.
If I had to choose one.
Is there a write-in? Hold on a second. Let's put E onto the list, or not listed.
Yeah, and anyone that doesn't answer will just assume that it's E, it's all of the above. But no, I think it would probably be around be simple and easy. I'm a busy guy. I got 3 kids, a busy job, and backup is, I kind of relate it to insurance. It's not something that you necessarily want to spend a ton of time doing, but boy, are you glad when something happens that you've got the right solution in place. But I don't want to spend all day every day managing backups, so probably be simple and easy. How about you?
Sam, I would pick that too, because simple and easy will actually make your life easier, and I think it will save you money. I think the most complex ones really tend to cost you more money because you don't know what's happening and you can't visually see everything.
Absolutely. All right, well, we've given you guys some time to answer, so let's have a look at these results.
Dun, dun, dun.
Oh, look at that.
Yes.
The audience aligns with us. Be simple and easy. And, we're going to talk about some simple and easy steps that you can use, not only to help control costs, but also address some of these other things as well, right? Not lock you out of new technology, being able to be flexible and agile, and then also, around cybersecurity as well. We do actually have a question coming from Priscilla. What thoughts do you have about how to manage the training of new employees on cloud server access so security issues are understood? John, do you want to jump in with your answer for that? And then I'll chime in too.
Yeah, so you just give everybody admin. No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. So the worst thing to do is typically what happens when new employees come on the training and everything. There's like, I don't have time to give you access to this. But I think if you educate them on the environment, you educate them, maybe they don't have the skills already for any type of cloud. You give them the training that's available and you walk them through some of the steps. It has to be very cohesive and hands-on. I don't think anybody wants to sit there and click a couple of the screens. You want to make sure that you give them the least privileges to everything as possible, only access to exactly what they need at that time. And I know it's a little bit more of a management nightmare, but there are some great tools out there that limit the access to only exactly what you need when you need it, and then it pulls away. It's like a time-based access.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to hit on the identity and access management as well, John. A ton of great training solutions out there. Some of them free. There's a number of certifications from each of the cloud providers that you can go through as well, just to help kind of build that foundational knowledge of constructs and terms and best practices and frameworks within the cloud. But I agree with John, like, especially for me, like the way that I learn is just getting hands-on. And there's a number of hands-on labs out there that are made available by the cloud providers as well as third-party vendors that operate in these cloud environments. It's not your environment, it's theirs, and they're often free. Veeam has these as well. I work for Veeam and we're the sponsor of this show today. But if you guys ever want to get hands-on, these free hands-on labs are a great way to do it. We partner with John as well on some of these. Do them in person. Come to the cities that you're in, and we'll bring breakfast, some coffee, and we'll get hands on a lab. But that's a great thing. But then, like John says, identity and access management, right? This whole principle of least privilege. Some folks will go around and call it zero trust as well. This zero trust framework, making sure that not just the people, but other services only have access to the other services and rights that they need at minimum to do their job and no more, and then revoke access as it's not needed and constantly rotate those credentials. Great question. And then we've also got a hi everyone from Mohammed. Everyone say hi to Mohammed. Hey.
Yo, Mohammed, what's up?
All right. So let's go. Let's get going and kind of like hone in on the reason why we've chosen to look at cost, right? And it's not just this economic uncertainty that has plagued all of our lives for the last couple of years now. It's also from this Flexera State of the Cloud 2023 report, where they asked organizations of all sizes, what are your organization's top cloud challenges? And managing cloud spend topped the list for everyone, right? From the largest of enterprises all the way down to the smallest of medium, to the smallest of businesses, and everyone in between. Managing their cloud spend was top of the list. John, why do you think that might be?
I think the biggest thing that happened is a couple of years ago, everybody's kind of going towards the cloud, right? Everybody wants to get there. You're starting to go in there, you're utilizing it, and you're kind of like, you're deploying out and building new applications. What has happened over the last couple of years is the education that cloud needs to be built for what cloud is meant to be: elastic, scalable, very quick, easy to use, and not leave services up and running that are not needed. And their cloud build now, what's happening is in the cloud, they're almost building a data center, and that's not what they should be doing. They should be analyzing and looking at the uses. And we're going to talk about a number of these things that you could do to minimize some of the costs. But now they have to go back and get their cloud bill. It's like bill shock, right? They open it up and like, holy crap, how did I spend that much? Because they're not doing some of the basic or best practices. We didn't have those skills to start. And now we need those skills and those education on some of the things that you can do. That's why I think it's number one. And I think it's been number one for the last couple of years. And I can't say I'm very surprised, but ahead of security. Security is usually the number one thing, while FinOps is like, 0.05.
Yeah, I agree. This is interesting as well, because that whole FinOps cloud spend piece has leapfrogged security. It's been the top for as long as they've been doing this report, but this is the first year where it's, even third for enterprise size organizations. But, I think you make some great points, John. The reality of the world that we live in right now is we've got these different departments within our organization. They have a need. And if there's not this structured framework and governance out there, they're just going to go to the cloud provider that first springs to their mind or most easily delivers the service that they're looking for, create an account, swipe a credit card, and off they go, building their application, whatever it might be. And that gets away from you quickly, right? It's this whole notion of cloud bloat. It results in the bill shock that John's talking about. So there's a ton of best practices and frameworks and governance around it to really help you achieve what your organizational goals are, but doing that on budget, right? And sometimes under budget. And backup's a big consumer of cloud resources, right? Now, the first thing that's going to spring to mind is the storage associated with it, right? We're creating copies of data. We're storing that data for a predetermined amount of time. Sometimes we have to store that data indefinitely. And in the cloud, it is a pay-as-you-go, pay for what you use model, right? So we're being billed in arrears based on what we use. And that can get away from us very, very quickly. But there's also other factors within the cloud that we're going to be charged for, right? There's the compute component. That compute component is associated with running the service itself, what's actually performing the backup. There's the compute of actually creating the backup and also performing restores. And then we've also got other components as well, like networking. So it's really key to understand how and when a cloud provider charges for networking to help you, again, control your bill. So we're going to get into some of these top tips, but before we do that, I can see some more questions have come in. So let's just kind of get these right away. This is for you guys. This isn't for us, so we want to answer that. So Priscilla asks a follow-up question. John, what are key conversations that our leadership should be having on how you should manage the access to documents and projects with clients without opening up the whole system to possible attacks and just managing access over time?
Well, you're just talking about access to documents, folder access, and limitability. I think that type of stuff should be set aside from your work environment, or your company's data. There should be an isolated just specifically for your customers. And this should be limited down to not only their domain, but actually down to the users that need access. Don't get everybody read, write, immediately, editor, whatever it is. Those documents. Now, while document management has been a nightmare for all the time that I can even imagine and think of, you still have to manage it. There's some great tools out there to help you manage that access. But when you talk to leadership, making it frictionless is actually the number one thing. If you have so much friction for any type of not only backups, data, or anything for somebody to do, nobody's going to do it, and they'll give full admin access. So the conversation to make it an easy tool to utilize is probably the first step that I would talk about, and always talk security in the aspect.
Yeah, fantastic question. I think, what John's really talking about, this notion of a logical air gap, right? So in on-premises days, right, we wanted to maintain a physical air gap. In the cloud, it's hard to do that where everything's connected. So we have to use the notion of logical air gaps, right? Using software and services to help us deliver that. And the same goes for backups, right? It's not just delivering the documentation, but also for your backups. I always advocate to have at least one dedicated account to host the backup service and store your backups that's separated from production. Right? So you maintain that logical air gap, and then using what we were talking about before, identity and access management, role-based access control, multi-factor authentication, to really limit the access between the two accounts, or the production account or accounts and the backup account, so people can't negotiate access so easily. And then a great question from Marius as well. He actually puts us in a dilemma, or a situation. You have two possible cloud solutions for the same problem, each one using different cloud components. Both solutions solve the problem, but how do you foresee which one is going to cost the client less? Are there any simulator tools, cheat sheets, etc.? What approach, best practices do you recommend? Fantastic question, Marius. There are a ton of resources out there that you can utilize to help forecast your spend. Some of them are made available to you by the cloud providers, AWS, Azure, Google, and any third-party service has the opportunity to API call into some of those calculators as well as list prices to help forecast costs within the product. We are going to double click into that as our 5th top tip. So I'm not going to give up the ghost or give up too much information, this early on, but we'll get into that. So let's start to get into our first top tip, which is around right-sizing your compute. Now, important to note that, Veeam is a backup company. You guys probably know that we protect workloads on premises, but yes, we can natively protect workloads in the cloud. Being a backup company, we're going to be kind of looking at controlling your cloud spend through that backup lens. But some of these tips, tricks, best practices, frameworks, whatever it might be, are equally applicable to anything that's outside of backup. And I think, this first one is the most true around right-sizing your compute. So, John, we've got some terms on the screen here, particularly around reserved instances and spot instances. Can you help us understand, what's a reserved instance, what's a spot instance, and what are some of the best practices around using these?
I do have another tip I want to add to this at the end, but let's talk about these reserved instances. Regardless of the cloud provider, there's committed base discount, there's reserve, AWS, Azure have their own listings on how it goes. And a reserve instance is just a billing construct. Right? You take an EC2, T2 extra large, and you say, I'm going to use, 100 of these in my environment. And we're always going to use them at 75% utilization into it. A reserve instance, you're going to say, I want to reserve these, and this is spare capacity that AWS has, or they want to reserve and lock you in for the billing aspect of it and say, I'm going to use these for 1 or 3 years. I only want to pay full upfront or partial upfront. And you get a discount based off of your commitment to have these. Now, there are some caveats, and trying to manage these yourself is very difficult because you're always changing your environment's dynamic. There's some great tools out there to help you understand and do it in an automated fashion. There's also convertible RIs, which are CRIs, and allow you get a little bit of a less discount on it, but it's still significant enough to invest in them. And you can change those throughout a period to others within the family type DOS. And this allows you to manage it automatically. I do not suggest anybody do this manually. Small shops are a little bit easier, but enterprises, very difficult. Auto scaling, it's a typical load balance scenario, but you're not always having like a web server on, or you're not having something do your batch processing. I need to do this batch right away, right now. Give me 100 instances, and when I'm done, it takes it down. And it's based off of a number of metrics that come in. It could be a network threshold, a CPU threshold, utilization, whatever it is, and it'll do it dynamically. Spot instances are pretty cool. So I'll take AWS as an example. They have a data center, and they always do like so many servers a day. They kind of deploy them out, and they're just sitting there idle, and they're saying, you know what? We're going to give you a discount if you utilize our spare capacity. But guess what? Here's a caveat. If we want it, we're taking it back from you within like 30-minute notice. And you have to build your application to handle these spot instances so that you don't lose it. And a good thing about it is like batch processing, some things that are not left on the disk, some things that are, easily that you can pick up where you last off. Even like web servers will sometimes actually be a good caveat for it. Dynamic compute, it's exactly what it is. It's changing your flexibility from, different instance types, different variables. You can utilize it and do some cost savings. EC2 is always your on-demand type of compute systems. And Sam, the last one I want to add to this is, we're talking about right-sizing your computer, but what about right-sizing your CPU? There's different CPU variations within all cloud providers that will give you a cost savings and a performance benefit for your environments.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think like the first thing to mention here is really just like think ahead and understand the workload, right? So one of the things that John's talking about here is predictability versus unpredictability, right? Yep. So if you have a workload with a very static or predictable pattern of usage and consumption and resources, things like a reserved instance is going to be probably better for you, right? If it's going to remain relatively static throughout the entirety of a year, going for a reserved instance, yes, you have to pay for it upfront, but you're going to capitalize on those upfront savings as well. Whereas something that is predictable but kind of bursts, like spot instances is going to be great there. And then something that's unpredictable, auto scaling, is going to help out a lot too. So as we translate this to backup and recovery, the service, right, the backup service itself is relatively predictable. So you might want to choose to run that on a reserved instance. I'm not saying you have to, but that might help you save upfront in terms of the compute that actually powers the service itself. And then things like spot instances might be better for the actual backup and recovery task itself, right? Because you're often not taking backups all day, every day. So if you can just dynamically spin up a workload, take the backup, and then power the workload down, conversely with recovery, you don't want something just sitting there idle, consuming resources that you're paying for. That's ultimately going to help you control the cost without having too big of a hit on performance. And then that kind of comes into the whole CPU piece that John was talking about as well. Understand like how intensive that workload is, and choose the type of instance, like John mentioned T2XL or a C4 instance, right? The CPU that's associated with that. Don't throw a super powerful instance at something that doesn't need it, because again, it's just unused spend, right? And you could be investing that elsewhere. Anything else on right-sizing compute before we move on to our next one, John?
No, I think we touched on all of it. I'm waiting for number two. Number two is one of the hot topics. In fact, actually, I have a question. So now that you have number two up there, let me talk to you about number one. Should I be doing number one before I'm concerned with balancing my storage costs and performance, or does it matter at any point in time?
It's a good question. And I think like when you're evaluating specifically a backup solution, you should be thinking about all of these before you implement it. But typically I think about right-sizing compute before the actual storage consumption piece of it. Again, personally, just because you want to understand what type of instance do you want to have your service deployed on, and what type of instances do you want your backup and recovery tasks to take place on. But conversely, like storage cost is tied into, the amount of storage you consume on a backup is tied to the size of the instance itself and the throughput and backup windows. You've got to analyze it all at the same time.
Gotcha.
All right, so let's look at balancing storage cost and performance. And this is an interesting one, right? Because we've got to understand that there's multiple different storage types available to us in the public cloud. And typically when we protect a workload in the public cloud, we want to do that natively. And the first line of defense that we take is the native snapshot. And snapshots are fantastic for a number of reasons. Number one, they offer very, very low RPOs. So if we have a mission critical application that we need to take dozens, if not more backups a day of, right? Because we don't want to lose a significant amount of data, snapshots are a great way to do that. Also, they're great from a recovery time objective, right? So to actually recover from a snapshot is very, very quickly. But there are a few drawbacks. And from a cost angle, snapshots live, let's just say we're talking about an EC2 instance. A snapshot initially lives on an EBS volume. And an EBS snapshot costs us 5 cents per gigabyte per month. It varies by region, but it's around about that much, sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less. But 5 cents per gig per month doesn't sound like a lot right away. But when you're dealing with hundreds of gigabytes, terabytes, sometimes even petabytes, and then we look at retention, right? How long do we have to actually keep that snapshot for? And then how many instances do we have to protect? That can add up very, very quickly. And John mentioned the notion of bill shock earlier on, and it's very, very real. I deal with customers on a weekly basis that are just like, I'm spending tens of thousands a month in just backup, sometimes hundreds of thousands a month in just backup. And one of the first things to look at is just like, what are they doing with their snapshots? We've got to evaluate other storage options, right? And a great landing zone for backups to live is object storage. So we're going to keep going down the AWS track, right? And we're going to say S3. And there's various tiers of S3 that have, are essentially from a backup angle. Some are balanced for higher performance, higher cost. Some are balanced for lower performance, lower cost. So what we want to do is automatically tier an image-based backup from a snapshot as it ages. And the great part of that is even the most expensive tier of Amazon S3 is 2.3 cents per gig per month, right? So first up, we're already saving half versus that 5 cents per gig per month for a snapshot. Archival, you go down to S3 Glacier Deep Archive, costs fractions of a cent per gig per month. It's 0.00099 cents per gig per month. So what we typically advocate for is keep your snapshots, maybe for a few days, maybe a week, maybe a couple of weeks. But as that backup ages, tier it across the different storages, because, okay, yes, they're less performant, but a backup that's 5 years old, do you really need it to be on a snapshot, or can it be on that lower performance S3 Glacier Deep Archive, costing you fractions of a cent versus 5 cents? I've rambled on a lot. John, what do you have to say here?
First of all, I know we have 5 of these, and I'm trying not to touch on to some of the ones in the later that we're going to be like 4 and 5 are very important, and they come into play into 2 here. Talking about snapshots, Sam, you touched on those, and going to archival storage. Do you really need? I mean, the only reason you need it 5 years is for compliance or security reasons. Do you need everything? Does everything need to be there? We're going to talk about some key ways to manage this in the later ones, but snapshots. I think the biggest thing with snapshots is that when you delete maybe an EC2 instance and you don't delete or have a trigger to delete the EBS, but you have snapshots that were tied to that EC2, those are not managed anymore. Those still sit in the console. Those are costing you dollars. If you don't need it anymore, there should be a system in place. We'll talk about some of the ways that you can do and manage that one to actually remove those that are, not needed anymore in an automated fashion. Sam, it's very important. I mean, the hot warm object storage, do you need it immediate or does it need to sit? S3 has some great options for having regional versus a single zone or a multi-zone environment, and replicating and syncing those throughout others. It's always nice to know what your provider has and what your needs are as a business. There's the wants and there's the nice to haves. And that's things you have to evaluate when it comes to doing your backups.
Agreed. And something that I haven't put on this slide, and it's just I'm thinking about it right now, is the notion of compression as well, right? So if we can take a backup and compress it, that's ultimately going to consume less storage footprint, and we can be a lot more efficient in our storage as well. I don't want this to be, a sales pitch, but Veeam can do 2-to-1 compression, so consume 50% less storage. So that's a great option as well for helping you control your costs. But again, don't want it to be a sales pitch. This is best practices for you guys to follow. All right.
Thanks, Thomas, for that little shout out. Backups are not live. Therefore, Sam's approach makes sense. Sam, you're right.
I think, should I call my wife down?
I'll text her later and tell her, hey, this guy said Sam's right.
There's a first time for everything, right?
And it's recorded.
Yeah. All right, number 3, understanding data transfer fees. Now, this is important when it comes to backup, because if we're looking for, geo redundancy across regions, that might be applicable for some of our workloads, but it might not be applicable for all of them. And understanding where cloud providers charge when it comes to network transfer fees is really important. So intra-region, keeping it within the same region is almost always not associated with a networking fee, right? So if I have a production workload that is running in US East 1, and I take my snapshot in US East 1, and I store my backup in US East 1 on S3, then I'm not going to have a cost associated from a networking perspective there. But if we want to have, a backup plan, pardon the pun, against, a regional failure, then backing up across regions is going to become applicable for particularly your more mission critical applications. And that's absolutely when cloud providers do start to charge for that networking traffic. And another one is around egress, right? So getting my data out of the cloud. Maybe that is just to send a backup copy to a different cloud provider or on premises. Maybe it's to do a recovery to a different cloud provider on premises. Egress fees, are expensive. Cloud providers don't want you to leave their platform. That's how they make their money. So just being mindful of these. John, any best practices around this whole regional approach?
I always take it as it's free to get in, but it costs you to get out. And if you think about it, is exactly what Sam says. They don't mind you bringing data into it, but transferring out is when it is. Some of the things that take in consideration, Sam, you mentioned intra, man, I can't even speak today, intra-region, and keeping that local with that. Have your application close to that allows you to save the cost. But obviously, you want to plan for regional failures. So you have to transfer it out of the region. How often are you going to use it? How often do you need to transfer it? Does it need to go and transfer daily, or does it need to be like every other day? However it needs to go, endpoints are a good one. Providers actually provide a way, it's called like an S3 endpoint, which is the back end of the system. If you're connecting between VPC and S3, transfer it that way, keep it on AWS's backbone because it's within the local region. This is probably the number one cost that nobody takes into association when they do a cost analysis, not only of their backups, but building the infrastructure within any cloud provider, is that data transfer costs are probably the most hidden one that's not taken into account.
Now, I'm also going to kind of give you guys a top tip around egress that isn't on this slide. But if you guys recall back to, I'm just going to bring it up. Maybe I won't. This slide, managing multi-cloud. It was the second biggest challenge for enterprise organizations. And of course, enterprise organizations are going to be much more likely to have that kind of multi-cloud architecture. We deal with a number of organizations that do want to do cross-cloud backup and recovery, but they don't want to pay those egress fees. So what I've seen a number of organizations do is implement P2P VPN. Maybe it is Direct Connect in AWS, it's Express Route in Microsoft Azure to handle the networking across the different clouds. Now, it's not free, but those egress fees are then nullified and it's treated as cross-regional traffic. So you still got to pay for it, but it's nowhere near as much as egress. So top tip there, if you do want to do cross-cloud backup and recovery, like backing up AWS into Azure, Azure into AWS, back on-prem, whatever it might be, P2P VPN, Express Route, Direct Connect, great options for you. All right, John, I think this is probably your favorite one.
Can I take it? Wait. Can I do it? This is my favorite.
Hey,
there we go.
John and I both use Mac, so
This is my favorite. Sam, can I jump on this one?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, first of all, I think you said automate. That's exactly what Sam's talking about. And I didn't want to lead this the way when we're talking about number 2 and number 1 is policies. You know, policies in place not only for your backups, what is backed up, how to do the backups, what is what region, the type of instances you want to do it. I think the biggest thing, Sam, next time we got to move tagging as a number 1 on this list. I've been talking tagging probably for years, and yet it's the simplest thing, but the hardest thing for everybody to do. One tag with a capital or a lowercase is different from a tag that's all lowercase, even though they might have the same verbiage. If you don't have a tag on your EBS, on your snapshots, on your EC2, here's what happens. When they do the backups, you're not transferring the tags over to it, and then you can't manage the snapshots using a data lifecycle management policy that keeps you from 3, 7, 14 days, and then transfers it over to S3, does the archival, and the whole lifecycle there. And now I'm out of breath because this is a huge topic, not only for policies, for tagging, to do your automation, and just like it says, Sam, automate.
Yeah, I agree. As cloud architects, cloud engineers, cloud admins, whatever we are, we've got a long list of priorities, and backup and recovery is important from a resiliency and an availability one, but it's not top of the list. And babysitting backups is not something that anyone wants to do, right? So I think anywhere that you can automate is ultimately going to free up your time to go and focus on other initiatives, right? So John mentioned the notion of tagging from a backup lens. Sometimes we see folks implement like a gold, silver, and bronze tier, right? Gold, we're taking, backups every 15 minutes and we retain it for 3 years. Silver, we take a backup every 6 hours and we retain it for a year. And bronze, we take a backup every day and we only retain it for 6 months. Just completely off the top of my head, but based on mission criticality of that workload, a assign that tag to that production workload, we'll just automatically pull it into that policy. And when you have that culture in your organization, and then you deal with the agility of the cloud, right, which is one of its huge benefits, I can just go and spin up a workload as and when I need it. You don't then have to go in and edit the policy or create a new policy to back up that workload. It's just automatically going to get pulled in. Huge from a governance perspective as well. I do want to talk about one of the questions.
I see it, and I was like, Sam, could you answer this question? By the way, we cannot offer any legal advice on this.
Yeah, absolutely. This comes with a legal disclaimer that I'm not making any advice here, but Marius asks a very good question. It's a cynical one, and that's good. I'm a cynic too. What if the cost of getting fined for not being compliant, i.e. not holding the data for 5 years, is less than storing all the required data for 5 years? So, for example, getting a $50,000 fine versus spending $100,000 on cloud backups. I don't have any advice for you. If that's a risk that you're willing to take, then that's a risk that you're willing to take. I mean, yes, there's the piece of the fine as well, but let's look at other reasons outside of compliance, right? Things like cybersecurity events. We're talking about, completely bringing down a business, or even exfiltrating data and posting, personally identifiable information on the web for anyone to see. Not only is there, of course, a regulatory fine to pay with that, 50K seems relatively light, but there's also like reputational damage to your brand. People aren't going to want to use you. So there's those, direct and indirect impacts, I think, of not storing data and not having a backup. If that's a risk that you're willing to take, by all means, go for it. But that is
Sam, I'm going to jump in there, and I think you touched on it. Your reputation. Is it worth your reputation for it, and is it worth your job? You're the one that's responsible. I think I want to just end it with do the right thing, right? Find a way to make it cost effective. Find a way to do some things, take it off site, shut it down, migrate it over and store it somewhere locally. I don't know, but you got to find the cost that works best for you.
Yeah, 100K. I don't know the size of your business, Marius, so I don't know if 100K is a lot of money or not a lot of money for the amount of data that you've got to protect in the cloud. But I've got some examples of customers that have saved with Veeam to kind of give you an example of how much they're spending. But that really ties us in nicely to the fifth one, which is predict and forecast your spend. And we've got 8 minutes left. And if I've got enough time, I'm going to go completely off script, not that we have one, and maybe share the screen with a visualization of the calculator. While I'm bringing that up, John, why don't you talk about predicting and forecasting spend?
Okay, so as cloud is predicting not only your spend or forecasting what is very difficult. Trying to do it with the native tools does work out. There's been some enhancements over the last couple of months that really make the simple screens. I do, speaking of, real quick, Sam, what cloud providers does Veeam support? Because we keep talking about AWS.
Yeah. Natively, we support AWS, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud, but we can protect any workload on any cloud with an agent-based approach as well. So I noticed Thomas mentioned Oracle Cloud. You can go with agents for that.
All right, cool, Sam. And I know we're talking about AWS, but I didn't want to limit this just to AWS. But AWS just also released, it's called the Kudos dashboards that allow the visibility to see all your right sizing, all your stuff in there. You have the Cost Explorer. But there's awesome third-party tools that allow you to accurately see your spend, predict what it's going to be, and forecast it. Now, cloud forecasting is very difficult because the engineers are the ones that are performing a lot of the tasks. And the people who predict it are typically the ones that are not building out the stuff. But Veeam has a great cost calculation for backups. When you do a policy, I think the best screen that I love on there is when you go through it, and Sam's actually going to bring it up shortly, is that what he's going to show is that the cost associated with your backup, and this is probably one of the coolest screens that I've seen with it when I was using their policy, it's where your backups are going to cost you. And you look at it and you're like, I'm not going to implement this policy. I'm going back and making some changes. Do I really need this, this, and this? That allows you to kind of accurately predict it. AWS has a cost calculator, a simple calculator for deploying. Azure has one. Google has one. Aligning your SLOs. And I really want to touch on negotiate. And one more I want to add to it. Negotiate. Every cloud provider has a way to negotiate your price. It's called, like, AWS has an enterprise discount program. It says, I'm going to spend $1 million in the next 5 years. For that, I want you to give me a 20% discount. And all that's negotiable. So you want to kind of understand what you can do and where your company is going to go to save on the cost. And the last one, Sam, I'm going to add to this is I wrote it down because it was very important. Accurately reporting your costs helps you predict and do a forecast on your spend. So that's probably another one I'd like to add onto the list, because it goes with the FinOps culture of everything, of reporting what you're spending, when you're spending, how you're spending, and then visibility. And Sam?
Yeah, absolutely. I did want to show this because Marius asked about like calculators earlier on in the call, and I think this is a good tie-in. Can you see the screen?
I can see yours. Yep.
All right, awesome. So this is our product for AWS. Veeam Backup for AWS lets you protect EC2, 6 different flavors of RDS, your VPCs, EFS, DynamoDB, Aurora. List goes on. And when you're going through and creating the policies that we were talking about in the automate section, it looks at the data that it's protecting. It looks at the list prices of AWS, and it looks at the backup settings that you put in. And before you even implement this, it's going to give you an estimated monthly cost. This one's going to cost me $5.29 to protect these 2 machines, an Ubuntu and a Windows Linux. A Windows instance. It even goes down and breaks it down by snapshots, replicas, backups, archives, the traffic, the network, and then the API calls for transactions, right? If we're putting something in S3 object lock and want to make it immutable, API calls for things like that. But this is completely dynamic, right? I can go into my schedule, edit my daily settings, and I'm going to say, you know what? I'm actually going to take, I don't know. Let's just say I'm going to take 2 snapshots an hour, and I'm going to take them on the hour every hour. And I'm actually going to keep more than 2 snapshots. I'm going to keep 100. And I'm going to hit apply next. And you can see within my cost estimation that that's gone up, right? It's only by a marginal amount. But now I know that I've got a much more robust protection of these workloads or that workload. And it's not costing me that much more. So again, just kind of helping you proactively align what are my expectations with my service level objectives. How much money do I have to play with? And if it's only going to cost me $5.34 and I've got $10 to spend, well, hey, I've got $4.66. Hopefully that's the right math, to go and spend on something that's way more fun. So, and that really brings us into this last slide, which is just how Veeam has helped some global organizations protect and secure their data across the cloud. I'm going to go and actually lead with this Best Friends Animal Society one. They're running on AWS. Veeam helped them save $42,000 a year in terms of storage costs. And then they reinvested that 42 grand still on AWS and purchased a new data lake, predictive analytics. You know, hey ho, we're getting the generative AI stuff in there. Yay, that's the big buzzword today. But that ultimately helps them drive better outcomes for their business. And, you know, when we're talking about Best Friends Animal Society, cats, dogs, birds, whatever, species you want to talk about are ultimately getting better served from the money that Veeam's saving them. Conversely, like we go to, a big multinational corporation, Hudson Bay Company, which is, I think, like one of the oldest companies in North America, but Saks Fifth Avenue, all of that stuff. AWS and Azure, more than $1 million in one-time CapEx, the actual cost of the solution, and then $600,000 in recurring OpEx, right? The actual cost of running the backup solution. And that's across AWS and Azure. Huge benefit of Veeam is, hey, we can consolidate everything under a single interface for you, whether that's on-prem, AWS, Azure, Google, the list goes on. And then this one is in response to Marius and the fine thing. Ciox Health, they create immutable backups of 500 terabytes of data daily with spending less than $20,000 a month. And they are doing the cross-cloud piece, right? They are taking their backups of AWS and storing it in Azure, and they're taking their backups of Azure and store it in AWS. And then they also have a colo that they're storing in AWS. Their total backup license, regional data transfers, storage, everything, 20 grand a month. And that's for a very significant portion of data. And it's also immutable. So great savings there. That brings us to less than a minute left. John, any parting words from you today?
Yes. Join the community. Anyway, Veeam's awesome to actually work with. The product is very simple and easy to use. But the whole premise of this is to kind of walk through some of the cloud cost optimization and strategies you can do for your backups and your environment. And we didn't center just on backups in general. It was really how you can look at your whole entire environment and look at some of the things. And it didn't matter cloud provider. We talked about AWS, Azure, GCP, and some of all the other things that Veeam can do. I think the best thing that you can take from this is don't just go in and set it and forget it, but look at each business application to see if it's needed and how you can improve upon it. Because if you do this, you'll be able to see all the improvements that can be made. And the last piece I'll give is automate. Automate everything as much as possible, because then you don't have to manage it, because nobody likes managing backups.
Absolutely. Like I say, it's just like insurance, something you're very happy that you have in the time of need, but you don't want to think about it every day, and you don't need to. So that kind of brings us to a close. We hope that you found the tips that we've given you today helpful. Again, didn't want it to be a sales pitch. This is something that you can and should implement across backup, anything that you're doing in the cloud. And the cloud doesn't have to be, or the cost of cloud doesn't have to be a headache for you. You've just got to approach it right. And John, how do we feel when we get that bill shock and we overspend? That's right. It's not good. Yeah, rain comes from clouds, but it doesn't need to. It doesn't need to. There's absolutely things that you can do to control the cost of your cloud spend, especially when it comes to backup. We hope these tips have helped. I do want to say a big thank you to everyone for joining. Thank you to John for joining us as well. Please find us both on social media if you have any more questions, and wishing everyone and your families a happy holidays, however you choose to celebrate, and we'll see you in the new year.
Happy holidays, everybody.